Hi, I'm Mike Chu. I'm the New Zealand Rugby National Coach Development Manager. Gives me great pleasure today to introduce Wayne Smith. Smithy has been with the All Blacks for many years, around 20 years as a player and as a head coach, and more lately as assistant coach to a couple of World Cup winning teams. Welcome, Smithy.
Thanks, Chewy. Kia ora, everyone.
So Wayne, look, let's kick off. You've had a huge involvement in rugby over the years at many levels. What are your thoughts on the current state of the game?
Well, I think there are several issues with the game at the moment. Clearly, there's a lot of thought going into the collision side of rugby. You know, athletes are bigger, faster, stronger. I mean, look at me. I'd be a referee today. You know, and the collisions are much more brutal than they were years ago, and there are consequences of that, and head injuries, spinal injuries, they're two of the major resultant injuries. And there are several things about that. So I think NFL show us that helmets and pads don't help, so we can't go down that track. There are current law interpretation changes around the height of the tackle, but there's cause and effect with any change in legislation. So as an example, they've lowered the tackle height to protect the ball carrier more from head injury. The effect of that could well be the tackler getting more head injuries. You know, if you're tackling low and you happen to get your head in the wrong position and you get a knee to the head, could be the tackler that we need to protect next. So I think it's a thing, you know, changing law, but it's not the only answer. And to me, I think it's these people here who hold the answers. It's a coaching movement that I think can determine the future of the game and resolve some of these issues. And what I mean by that, by teaching good technique in contact, such as chin up, going in, eyes open, you're better to see the danger coming rather than not. Puts you in a much safer position when your head's up. You'd rather get a nose like mine than get whacked on the top of the head and the spine squashed or create head injuries. And you know, and getting the head in the right position in collision phases, those things are important. And the good thing about that is that generally the safest techniques are the most effective techniques. So I think you win all around. You raise the chances of your team being successful results-wise, and you raise chances of it being a great experience for the players and people watching, because it'll be safer.
So Smithy, you've been coaching pretty much since rugby went professional, ever since you coached the Crusaders in the mid-90s. What do you see as some of the future of the global game?
Well, I think again there are some major challenges there. Just in line with what I was talking about before about safety, managing player workload is really critical. The games now seem to be stacked on top of each other. There's competitions on top of competitions. There's a huge amount of travel. You know, the All Blacks last year went around the world twice within about a 9-week period, and I think we had 10 different time zone changes, and fatigue sets in, you know, which is often a predictor of injury and overtraining. So I think that, along with minimising the talent drain, that there's a lot of, certainly in the Southern Hemisphere and probably countries like Canada, certainly the islands, America, that there's a talent drift to the Northern Hemisphere. And whilst that might be good for owners of clubs up in Europe, I don't think it's good for the game. So the answer to me seems to be less games, greater amount of dollars. So play less and earn more. But that can't happen without a lot of planning, clearly, and the involvement of World Rugby. So I think we've got to come up with some sort of global season. Now, I know that's going to be difficult, but essentially we need the Southern Hemisphere and the Northern Hemisphere seasons overlapping to a point where we can reduce the number of games and the amount of travel, because we're playing in more or less the same times. I think that's important, and along with revenue sharing. So I know Ian Ritchie, for example, from the RFU has said that it's not England's job to fund the global game. Well, it is. It's every major power's job to fund the global game, and we're all in this together. And rugby can't afford to have the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And we, for example, we're a small country, New Zealand, but I don't think rugby globally can afford us to become a backwater, But I think in 20 years, that's a threat. And it's like you look at developing countries where 99% of the wealth's with 1% of the population, and those countries are characterised by poverty, starvation, deprivation, and we don't want rugby to be like that. So I think World Rugby now has a real challenge to unite thought on this and to get a global, a common global reaction to it, and all be responsible for developing rugby in Romania, Georgia, Canada, America, the islands, and keeping it as strong as we can around the world.
So in 20 years' time, some of the things that you'd like to see is maybe a global season. What other things, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to see?
Well, when I talked about that there's a drift of talent north, and there's a drift of economics north, there's clearly been a drift of support north as well. There's 7.7 million players globally now. Rugby is a major global sport and it's growing, and we want it to grow. But we need to be a part of that as well. I was reading about the Harlequins Gloucester game. Now, Harlequins were sitting about 5th in the premiership at the time. This was just after Christmas. Gloucester were about 9th. They drew 77,500 people to watch them at Twickenham. Now, that's amazing.
Yep.
When Daniel Carter played for Racing 92 in the top 14 final in Barcelona, they had 92,000 there. Now that's amazing. And we're seeing here 15,000 is a good crowd at Super Rugby. So I think in Southern Hemisphere, we're going to have to be way more innovative around how we present rugby. Somehow we've got to ignite and unite our fans a lot more than we're doing. And you look at things like, you look at the Sevens circuit, for example. So there's been a lot of publicity about Wellington, that the crowd's declining. Now that was a tournament that was based on a party, based on alcohol and having a lot of fun. I went a couple of times and there were more people facing the back of the stand than facing the field. And yet I see Sydney, Vancouver and Las Vegas filling the ground. Sydney was alcohol free, and I think it was alcohol free for 800 metres around the ground. And what that seemed to do was bring families into it. There was a magnificent feel about it. Vancouver looked exactly the same, so did Las Vegas. So I think we've got to get all that right. And I was talking to Steve Chew a while ago about how a lot of countries come to New Zealand to look at how we play and how we coach. Maybe we need to look at other countries around how they present the game and how they're igniting their fans, because I think we've got a wee bit to learn there. I look at the women's game. Now, women's game is becoming massive. I don't know the figures for women playing the game. I watch their sevens tournaments. I think their sevens tournaments are at least as good as the men's. Now, why can't a sevens tournament be like Wimbledon, where men and women share centre stage? I'm sure that's becoming more prevalent, but it needs to be, because there's another group of people who could become rugby fans through the women's game. I look at the Tens tournament held in Brisbane this year, and no one really knew how that was going to go. None of our Super Rugby teams had ever played Tens or knew much about it. The coaches were going to the tournament to learn about how to play, and I know the Chiefs coaches, they were under a bit of pressure because they played first. Yeah, they didn't know anything about the game, and then they had to watch the other teams play and come up with a plan. But what I saw there was every attacking play had positive intent. Mm-hmm. And so because you've only got 10 minutes each way, the consequences of not being positive are huge. You know, the other team's going to get a march on you. So that's what I loved about it. And so we talk about changing laws in 15s to make the game better. Well, 10s played under the same laws, but because everything was positive and there was very little cynical play, it was easier to follow and easier for the refs to referee. I suppose I haven't talked to them, but it looked easier. And I thought it was huge. It was a huge success, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how 10s develops. And so maybe in 20 years, maybe it will be like cricket, where cricket you got test match cricket, you got 2020 and 1 days, and there's something there for everyone. And we don't want 15s to diminish, but we need to grow other parts of the population that'll follow us. So yeah, I think there are some of the challenges we've got, and some of the issues I think around our footy at the moment. Certainly down here, as I said, we're not really connecting as much as we should with public. I'm not sure why. Don't think Mad Monday's the answer.
No.
It doesn't help. There are a few issues around the sport at the moment, and we need to sort those out, because we're New Zealand sport, you know, and the country still cares deeply about the All Blacks, but we want them to care deeply about rugby and in general, and get back to the days when people were going to watch the game at every level.
Yes, look, I agree, and I think there's a lot of messages there that are going to resonate with people, particularly around the global season and looking after our players. And also, I know with New Zealand Rugby, we've got a strong push to grow the women's game, and also with sevens being an Olympic sport now, that's a huge opportunity for a lot of countries as well.
Yeah, and we are learning the lessons, aren't we? So Farah Palmer come on to the New Zealand board. I think that's one step. You know, rugby should be the sport globally that leads respect and responsibility, and there's no reason why New Zealand can't lead rugby in that area. And that should be, I think, one of our aims. You know, in 2004, Graham Henry, Steve Hansen, myself, Gilbert Anoka and BJ Lahore, we met here in Wellington because we weren't happy with the behaviour of our team, how we had performed in the Tri-Nations back then. And we sat here for 2 days and we had an epiphany, and that epiphany was that better people make better All Blacks. And so that dominated everything we did over the next 8 years leading up to the 2011 World Cup. That drove everything we did in the game. And it was about not ditching people because they had behavioural breaches, but trying to help them get better, help people live the standards that we want them to live. And it had a massive effect, I think, on the All Blacks. And we ended up with probably the best leadership group that's ever been seen in the game. And it had a lot of 100-test All Blacks in there who had grown up the right way. So that was massive, and it also showed that, yes, you have to work on performance as a coach, and you've got to work on culture so that the personal meaning's high, but working on character is a real key to consistent performance. And you can be the most dominant team in the world on the field, but you can't do it without being the most dominant off the field and having the highest standards. And I think that's something we need to always keep in mind.
Look, great insight, Smithy. So you've touched on better people, and I know that you're a big proponent of character in your players and the people around you. So can you talk us through how culture in the All Blacks has changed over the time from when you were a player to now being a part of the management team, and some insights into how that change has occurred?
Yeah, ironically, I would say that it's probably turned a wee bit of a circle. Like when I was playing, because you only had one coach, generally the coach, and I could talk about someone like Bryce Rope here, Eric Watson, for example, coaches I had, Peter Burke, BJ Lahore, who tended to involve you a lot more in the coaching. So it was often, certainly near the end of my career, it was more like it'd be Smithy, you take the backs away and work on some of those plays, and it might be Andy Hayden or Murray Mexted or Jock Hobbs take the forwards away, and the coach would sort of roam around amongst the two. Then when I started coaching, there was way more of the cult of the coach. So coaching became more of a science. It was related more closely to academia. There were people studying other sports, and so we became in our own minds way more important, way more influential on the result than we should have been. And so we went through that period, and certainly since 2004, the All Blacks, I think, have led the way in terms of dual management of the team between players and staff. So we went from making unilateral decisions as coaches and management to involving the players in that. We moved to every Sunday evening having a chat with some influential leaders to establish priorities for the week, work out a plan of who was going to do what, and then engaging the team in those things. So it's gone back a wee bit towards the Smithy take the backs away. You know, there's way more
a lot of player input.
Way more player accountability and input than there was over a decade ago, and I think that's good for the game. There was a change. We had a change in coaching philosophy around that 2004 period, and you imagine a coach like Graham Henry, head coach at the time, had been headmaster at Kelston Boys High, you know, and I don't know what teachers are like in your day, but in my day they caned it into you, you know. Yeah.
My boss here is still doing that to me.
yeah. Well, you had corporal punishment, didn't it, basically at schools, so Graham, to me, is the greatest example of a coach being able to change a paradigm, a personal paradigm, where I think he and Steve Hansen will go down as probably two of the greatest head coaches in history, and they've both gone through different roads, different pathways. But Graham's was extraordinary, I thought, because I still remember we were playing Tri-Nations in 2004 and we hadn't gone very well. I think it was against Australia over there, and he came to my room and he said, you know what the problem is with this team, Smithy? And I said, what do you reckon, Ted? And he said, they're not bloody doing what they're told. And I said at the time, maybe that's the problem. Maybe we're telling them too much. And you know, and he then became a leader in the field internationally of asking, creating self-awareness through questioning approach. And not only that, making sure he got descriptive answers from the players. So rather than asking, why'd you do that, and getting I thought I was right, getting a justification, he was asking what questions. So what would you do to score from here, boys? And which takes a descriptive answer and creates self-awareness. And he started this, along with Steve and I and Mike Cron, started this whole improvement in players' self-awareness, self-esteem, players understanding they had strengths in this area and thinking, coach thinks I know something, feeling worthy in terms of giving to the sport, giving to the team. It was just a great era to be involved with. And now Steve Hansen has probably taken it to another level, you know, as we've developed as a team.
Well, I remember talking with Ted, and he said the biggest shift he made is he gave out more cuddles. Yeah.
More cuddles, but meaningful cuddles. You know, you don't give cuddles just for the sake of it. But we absolutely had a greater emphasis on reinforcing players' strengths and getting them to work on their strengths. And you know, in those early days, you'd sit down with a player and say, what are you really good at, mate? And they go, oh, don't really know. Like that, you know, you say, come on, you must know what you're good at. You've been selected for a reason. And often I'd have to say, well, someone in England watching you play who doesn't know you, who's never seen you before, but see you play, what would they say about you after the game? And then you might get oh, did I got a good step and I can beat people? And then you'd say, well, when did you last work on that? And you'd often get, 2 years ago. You know, and so we came up with, you had players coming through that only being told what they couldn't do. And all their time was spent on their left foot kicking, their clean out. You know, first fives were told they couldn't clean out and they needed to clean out. Well, I could count the number of rucks I cleaned on one hand in my career. You know, so we started working on improving your strengths, because that's what will make you a champion. And then we had an 80-20 rule, and then 20% was spent on what's really important for you in your position, in your role in the team that you can't do very well. We'll do a bit of work on that as well and bring it up to a strength. But don't go wasting your time running around doing other stuff that doesn't really count. And I think they were magnificent those years, and went through a tough time clearly in 2007 where we failed at the World Cup, but that can happen. We were lucky enough that Steve Chu and the board were modern enough and forward enough thinking to understand that we were doing everything we could, and that you'd lose all that experience if you sacked us. So I think they made a really far-sighted decision to keep us going.
Quite a bold decision, wasn't it?
Really bold, and it paid dividends, only just, of course. We put our lives, our families put their lives into winning in 2-11.
Only just the 8-7 thrashing?
8-7. We still could have lost it. After doing all the work we did on self-awareness, all that we did on being proactive, on owning the performance, on having players dual managing the team, all this work we did, we still only won 8-7.
Yeah.
And but I think over time it's paid dividends, and it's been a pretty good era.
Yeah, look, it's been a fantastic era to be watching the All Blacks. Smithy, you touched on the science-driven coach, and you have a reputation for always seeking new knowledge and learning. How has the academic fraternity, or how has research guided some of your coaching?
Yeah, the two parts to that. So the first part is academic clearly has had an effect on a lot of Kiwi coaches that are making a big influence around the world. For me personally, you know, I did all my New Zealand level 1 to level 5 courses. I was part in writing some of the manuals. I ended up taking some of the courses, and I think that was important as a coach, that you're giving to these courses as well as just sitting there and learning. I did some postgrad papers at Massey University on rugby coaching, specifically on rugby coaching. And I think of others that did that who have made a huge contribution to rugby. Murray Mexted was in my group. Now through IRANS, I think he's had a major influence on a lot of kids coming through that aren't on the pathway, they aren't in the academies, and they're not on the scholarships, and they're not in the age grade teams. But there's some really good players gone through IRANS, through Murray Mexted's academy, that have become All Blacks. I think we counted 12 or 13 when I was there this year, and they were kids that might not have realised how good they were. Graham Henry, clearly, as a headmaster, came through an academic background. Then other coaches, Joe Schmidt, Vern Cotter, Pat Lamb, I think all did the level courses, and I think did some study from Massey. Steve Hansen did a lot of the courses and presented a lot of them. Ozzie McLean.
Colin Cooper.
So there's been it's been a huge part of developing them and helping the world in many ways. But we're also, that there's if you can turn the page, and I think a lot of coaches are almost phenomenologists, and by that I mean you try things as a coach, and often they're bold, like a bold initiative. I think of Scott McLeod with the Highlanders in 2015, changing the defence to a rush defence, or John Plumtree last year doing some things that were different in defence. And if they work, someone writes a book about it. And probably they'll write a book about it if it doesn't work too. But, you know, so you're not just learning from books, you're actually contributing to books by the initiatives you put in place and their success or otherwise. The downside of that is sometimes that can stop young up-and-coming coaches putting their head above the parapet, you know, scared of the failure and wanting to follow everyone else rather than be their own person. But it's the ones that I think are bold and show initiative and are prepared to back that up that go forward fastest.
So, Smithy, I mean, you've actually, talking about books, contributed to a number of books and chapters in books in and around your coaching approach. Can you just give us an insight into how you approach this art of coaching?
If I had one underlying philosophy, it would be that people will rise to a challenge if it's their challenge. You know, so I think that underpins a lot of how we coach in the All Blacks and the environment we create. So a player's not necessarily going to rise to my challenge, but if he's got a huge personal meaning or she's got a huge personal meaning about what they're doing, they're going to have a pretty satisfactory career. You know, they're going to get a lot out of it. Align that with better people make better All Blacks. That tells you a wee bit, and we've spoken about that, but tells you a wee bit about how we want players to be off the field. You know, and some recent events show you that you're an All Black 24/7, whether you're in the team or out of the team. Absolutely. You know, if you've been an All Black and you're in the paper, it's never so-and-so did this, it's so-and-so former All Black. And it's important players know that. So that whole, and I'm not talking about, I probably won't talk about coaching so much here, it's more working on the character and you know, you walk into a meeting today in many environments and the older guys in the team will be sitting there saying, oh, how's Bridget going at home? You know, how are the kids? They come to the game and, you know, they're talking. And then you'll get some of the millennials there on the phone, you know, tweeting something and the coach comes in and whoop, phone goes off, goes in the pocket and they're engaged. Yes. But you want them to be engaged with each other and connecting with each other. And you know, there's a lot of study going on around mental health today, and surely talking to each other, asking about how people are going is one way that we can help mental health. So I think, you know, things like putting the phone away, talk rather than tweet, hang with people that are good people and are going to help you in life. From a coach's point of view, I got some really good advice from a good man called David Hadfield one day, and he said, Smithy, you'll be the same man in 5 years except for the books you read and the people you meet. And I've read a lot of books since then that are applicable to coaching. They're not necessarily coaching books, they might be management books, they might be books by coaches from other sports. They might be research papers, and I've met a lot of people from around the world at different conferences and been on tours and connected with a lot of good people who have always taught me something. And you know, Steve and Chrono and Graham and Ian Foster and we've always had the same view that if you share ideas, you share an idea, you get 5 back. And so if you look at New Zealand Rugby at the moment, we connect hugely with Super Rugby and Mitre 10 teams and coaches, and they connect hugely with us, and I think that's a real edge that New Zealand Rugby's got. So we continually, at the moment, we're continually going around the Super Rugby teams. There's a recognition that, you know, this time of year we don't coach the All Blacks. The Super Rugby coaches are the All Black coaches this time of year. And so there's no downside to going and sharing all your ideas with them. The other part of that is that you get ideas back because they're at the coalface at the moment, and all our coaches are innovative, keen, hungry, and you learn a lot of ideas off them. So you see that the All Black culture has contributed widely to provincial teams and Super Rugby teams. And as you go around, you'll see familiar patterns, structures, even weekly schedules, even play calls, and different terminology we use. But you can turn that around as well, because we're half run by the players. As they come in from their environments and they're contributing to how we're going to play, you're getting a lot of stuff that's good in their environment coming into the All Blacks, and plus we're seeing it too. So we're learning from Super Rugby, and might attend to a lesser degree because we're always away playing, but we try and have relationships with a lot of those coaches as well. And so the New Zealand Rugby is dynamic and vibrant, I think, in that respect. You've got everyone contributing to each other, and it's a hell of a good place to be.
Look, I'd agree. I think it's a real strength that the alignment and integration across the whole system here in New Zealand is something that keeps us, I think, ahead of a lot of other countries. One thing that we're here at a conference with a lot of researchers. In your experience, is there some areas that you'd like to see some research done, maybe not specifically in rugby, but in around developing culture or leadership, or even in rugby itself?
I read a book last year by Kotler called The Rise of Superman, and that really stimulated some thinking. It's around the extreme athletes and how they're always in flow, and if they're not in flow, the consequences are massive. And because the stakes are high and the consequences are huge, that's part of the reason they are in flow. They've got to be sharp, and they often make decisions on the spur of the moment that are life-changing. So we're interested in a bit more research around that. Your body fills with positive chemicals when you're in flow. So how do you replicate that? How do you build that through a week? I think some more research on that would be interesting with regard to our sport. I know Red Bull, do a lot of that in their area of sport, but I think it'd be interesting for rugby. Clearly the research around head injury and injury in general is important, and just knowing specifically what is it that's causing it. So is it, rugby's a tough game, so is it just collateral damage? Is it often coincidental because you're playing such a tough game, or is it a coaching issue, or is it a law issue? So a bit more research in that, and trial of laws before they go to get put in place, but quick trials so that they're done with immediacy, and there's good data collated and good decisions are made. I think that's important. Another area I'm really interested in is decision making. So, you hear a lot of coaches talk about playing heads up rugby. What does that mean? You play heads up, and does that mean you look at everything? Because I know if I looked at everything, I saw nothing. And that actually makes you sluggish. So it's anti-decision making. So what do you look at? Because decision making is about predicting the future really quickly and then executing it. And often you do that off the opposition, the cues that you're picking up off the opposition, but also you're doing it off your own teammates. So if you're supporting a player with the ball, predicting what he's going to do next determines your behaviour. So there's a great scene in a film called Transformers 3. I'm sure you've all seen Transformers 3, and it's where these guys jump off a building, off a skyscraper, and they've got those flying suits on.
Yes.
Oh, they're crazy. Yeah. Absolutely crazy. But they've got to go off this building, so they've got to manage dropping off in a group against a updraft, and then they've got to come down, and as they come down, they've got to turn greater than 90 degrees around another building. So I think about 110 degrees around this building. If they turn too early, they're going to hit that building. If they turn too late, they're going to hit the next building, because they're going to go through a little alleyway. And it's incredibly mind-blowing stunt, and it's real. It's real in the movie. So this group of flyers, they went out into the wilderness somewhere for about a month, and they practiced off these cliffs, and they found that because they were following each other in this stunt, when the first guy turned, if the if the second guy waited until he turned, it was too late, and he was going to go into that next building. Or if he turned too early, he was going to go into that building. So they had to find a cue, and the cue was the heel of the leading flyer. So as it twitched, that's when the next guy had to turn.
And so on.
So that's and that's like rugby, isn't it? So you see, you've got a player in your team that when he's running with the ball, he's you know he's going to offload from the outside hand. It determines how deep you need to be in your support play, and you're going to expect the offload, or you're going to expect to have to clean. You know, so knowing those things is important. Looking at the opposition and seeing the wingers standing behind 10, when they do that, they normally do such and such play, gives you an advantage as a defensive team if
so
you're on the same wavelength.
Cue recognition is critical.
Cue recognition is incredible, but a bit more information around how you look, how you switch from wide to narrow.
And what to look for.
And what to look for. I think there's more work to be done on that yet.
Look, let's wrap it up there. Thanks so much, Smithy. Is there any other messages that you'd like to pass on to our coaches and researchers and people attending this conference?
Yeah, I've got one actually, and I'll show you on a flip chart. Yeah, so this is one of the areas of the game I'm really interested in, and there's a bit of a trend here. So, Jerry, that's sources of tries, and this is just in international rugby in general.
Sure.
So 55% tries come from that source of possession. What do you reckon that is?
Turnover?
No.
Kick receipt?
No.
First phase?
No. Oh, closer. Closer. I'll just put it in a wide category. Our ball. So 55% of tries scored off our ball. So
I'm kind of close.
Well, no, not really. I've just been kind when I said that. So 45% of tries are off, what's that source?
Their ball.
Their ball. You caught
Fast
on.
learner.
You caught on fast. So that's amazing, isn't it? That we're only scoring 55% of tries off our ball, and that 45% are off ball that you think you've got no control over, because they've started with that possession. So that looks like kick receipts, turnovers, spillages, lost lineouts, tight heads. So in general, those sorts of plays. So if we look at this chart, I think Cherry might be able to tell us the answer to this one. So what does that 90% stand for?
And this is sources of tries again?
No.
So
But it relates to the last
so
chart.
I have no idea what the axis
No,
is.
that's right. So what do you reckon that represents? I'll show you because it's a tough one.
Training time.
Training time. So despite the fact that 45% of tries are scored from the opposition ball, we still spend 90% of our time on our own ball and very little time given to counter-attack, motion offence, whatever you want to call it. And why is that? I reckon it's because coaches are really comfortable coaching this, so they know how to run a line out, how to run a scrum, they know how to do a back play, and they generally know a defensive pattern because they've seen that and they've learnt that. But they feel uncomfortable about counter-attack because they're not too sure how to do that, so they tend not to spend much time on it and say, well, you know, when you get the ball, just use it the best you can, boys. 2 passes. That's one I always hear, 2 passes, boys. But the good thing about this is that you don't need to know a lot about counter-attack, and it's not actually about flair. So counter-attack really is about efficiency of the movement. It's a race between you and the opposition to become stable. And so all it really needs is to teach the players how to get up quickly off the ground, or to get into position quickly from wherever they are, to look in the right direction while they're doing that. So it's no good running into a position like that, then turning to counter-attack. You know, you've got to be able to see what's happening and where the space is as you're getting back. Covering the full width of the field. So it's no good all being close and together, where one defender can mark two attackers, for example. So you need to space out, you need to cover the full width of the field and force them to make decisions. And you need to commentate. So what you're commentating on where the space is and where the weak links are. So a weak link might be a player outside of his comfort zone in defence. Might be a prop out in the wide channel, for example. Or it might be a scrambling defence that's rushing to get wide because they're worried about your wide attack and leaving an inside channel free. So that's what you're looking for, but that's not enough either. So you then need to give a solution of where to attack. But that's pretty simple. You know, if you can understand, that's quite a simple way of putting it. But if you understand those things, you can spend a bit of time on that at training. Also, you hear a lot of coaches say, oh, well, you know, if we're scoring that many tries off their ball, it's something we can't really control. So if they decide to give it to us, then we'll attack off it. But you know, part of counter-attack is spending time on how do you force a poor kick. So how do you force them into a kick for a start? So you might shape the opposition attack by standing flat, for example, as the ball's about to come into their source of possession. Maybe put into a scrum or a line out or something. Everyone's flat. The first 5 looks, there's a space there to kick, and then you change your position late. He kicks, and you got a simple counter-attack situation. Or you might do a wee bit of work on that kicker and know which foot he's going to kick off, and make sure that the frontline guys are putting some pressure on him, and so forcing a poor kick. You know, so getting into a space and forcing them to miskick the ball, so to give yourselves a simpler counter-attack. And while your frontline guys are doing that, your backfield guys are getting excited about ball's going to come, and it's going to come, and gives a bit of time because the frontline's going to do their business, and they're also going to turn out to block the chasers a wee bit, so we're going to have a bit of time here. So those sorts of things. Which ruck do you counter ruck on to try and pinch the ball? You know, do you do it off the first phase? Maybe not, because generally teams have good structures, good clean out structures on that first phase, so you might leave that one alone, and it might be the second or third ruck that you think an opposition's weak on. You know, so those sorts of things, I think.
Would you put some time also into line out steals and what you do?
Absolutely. Yeah. So
off that.
You know, the best way to defend a line out drive or a line out play is either give them poor quality ball or steal it. So yeah, I reckon a lot of time into that. Tap kick moves, or if you don't want to move, at least really quick formation on quick taps, so you've got good support structures and you're able to catch them napping. So that's a huge area and a huge source of tries. I reckon you want to spend a bit of time on it.
And conversely, you're spending a lot of time on going from attack to defence when you've turned over the ball, and how you set your defensive line and get more stable. Yeah,
so typically we'd carry a couple of balls at training, and after a play, you know, if you've got an opposed session, halfway through a play, introduce a second ball for the other team, so you're switching around quickly. As I say, it's a contest, isn't it, between you and the opposition team to become stable quicker and then take advantage of that situation.